Imagine you are told plainly and repeatedly that someone is coming for your job. Not a rumor, you believe it. You have said so out loud in public. You have written it down and sent it to the most powerful man in the world. And then, knowing all of that, you get on a plane and fly to the other side of the world. What would it take for you to do that? What would you have to believe about your own position to leave it that exposed? That is what Kwame Nkrumah did on the 21st of February, 1966. He left Ghana for Hanoi, at Ho Chi Minh's invitation, carrying a mandate from the Commonwealth Prime Minister's Conference to try to end the war in Vietnam. Somebody else's war on the other side of the planet. And while he was in the air, his own country stopped being his. 3 days later, at dawn on the 24th of February, army and police officers took Ghana. They called it Operation Cold Chop. He never came home again. Stay with this one because the interesting part for you is not that it happened. Coups are common in this decade. What is unusual here is the paperwork. The United States government wrote down what it knew, and when it knew it, and those documents are now public, you can read them yourself tonight. By the end of this, you will know what a U.S. ambassador told the director of the CIA 11 and a half months before the coup, and what he got right and what he didn't. You will know what one National Security Council staffer wrote, in his own words, about withholding money from Ghana. You will know how long the new government actually had to wait for American aid, and the number is not the one the popular version of this story tells you. And you will know which famous claim about this coup falls apart the moment you check it. Ask most people what happened to Nkrumah and you get one of two answers. Which one is closer to what you believed walking in? The first, the CIA did it. Africa's independence hero removed by Washington, end of story. The second, from someone who's read a little more, he brought it on himself. A one-party state, an economy in ruins, a leader who jailed his critics and was surprised when the army moved. Both are supportable. Neither is the whole record, and you deserve the whole record. So let's start with money, because that's where this story actually lives. Here's a way into it you might recognize. Suppose you run a bank and a business owner comes to you for a loan. His company is genuinely in trouble, not because of anything you did. The market turned. Before he walks in, his own business partner has quietly told you he intends to take the company over and that he's waiting for the right moment. You decline the loan. That's your right, you didn't cause his trouble. But you knew what refusing would do, and you knew who was waiting. What does that make you in that moment? Hold that thought. Now the record. 11th of March, 1965, nearly a year before the coup lands. What could anyone possibly know that far out? A meeting in Washington, 3 in the afternoon, running half an hour. Present, John McCone, the Director of Central Intelligence, and William Mahoney, the American ambassador to Ghana. The memorandum is classified secret. It sits today in the CIA's own released files and in the State Department's official documentary series. You don't have to take my word for it, because anyone can read it. Here is what you need to know from it. Mahoney tells the director that certain men in Ghana are actively plotting to remove Nkrumah. He names 3 of them, and you should hold on to these names for a moment. The acting police commissioner, Harley, and 2 generals, Attu and Nkrumah. He says he cannot say when, but predicts Nkrumah will be gone, his phrase, one way or another, within a year. He expects a military junta. Here's what actually happens, and it's more interesting than a clean hit. 11 and a half months later, 2 of the 3 men Mahoney named, Harley and Nkrumah, sit on the 8-member council that runs Ghana. Nkrumah chairs it. That's 2 of 8 seats correctly named in advance in writing by an American ambassador, not a majority, and not the whole story. The 3rd man Mahoney named, Attu, never sits on that council at all. And the coup's actual operational leaders, Colonel Katoka, and Major Afrifa appear nowhere on Mahoney's list. No document located in this file names either of them in advance. And in that same conversation, the same half hour, you should notice this, Mahoney says something else. Nkrumah is going to ask America for financial help. Mahoney's advice: refuse him. Refusing, he argues, will destabilize the regime further. Notice what you just read. The plot and the money are not two separate stories. In the primary record, they are one conversation, in one room on one afternoon from one official, and that's the first thing most accounts of this coup miss. Now the second document, and you'll want to pay especially close attention to this one for your own sake. 27th of May, 1965. Robert Comer of the National Security Council staff writes to George Bundy, the president's national security advisor. Also secret, also public now. Comer writes that key military and police figures have been planning a coup for some time, and that Ghana's deteriorating economy may provide the spark. Then this, and you'll want to hear it exactly as written. The plotters are keeping us briefed, and state thinks we're more on the inside than the British. Read that again, slowly, 9 months before the coup. One memo describing that as the relationship. And then the sentence this episode turns on. Comer writes, "While we're not directly involved, I'm told, we and other Western countries, including France, have been helping to set up the situation by ignoring Nkrumah's pleas for economic aid." Let that sit for a second, because it is not a historian's interpretation of American policy. It's one NSC staffer, in his own words, on paper, telling the president's own national security advisor what U.S. policy was doing. Now let me be precise about what that does and does not establish. It establishes that one NSC staffer understood the withholding of aid as deliberate and as contributing to conditions for a coup. It does not establish that anyone intended the specific coup that followed, and it is one staffer's memo, not a formal NSC finding. And look closely at where the hedge sits. We're not directly involved, I'm told, because "I'm told" qualifies only that first clause, not the sentence that follows it. Comer is recording secondhand that the U.S. wasn't directly involved. He is not hedging the helping to set up the situation part at all. That's his own assessment, stated as his own. Now the economy those memos are talking about, because you need to know how bad it actually was. What does close to broke look like in a country's own numbers? Picture your own savings account behaving like this. Ghana in 1965. Foreign reserves that stood above £200 million in 1954, nearly gone. The government printing money. Inflation at 35% between October 64 and July 65. Soldiers' pay, set in 57, worth about a third of what it was. The army short of uniforms. If you were one of those soldiers, how would that feel? And underneath all of it, cocoa. Ghana's export, Ghana's foreign exchange, Ghana's everything. If you take nothing else from this section, take that dependency, because you'll need it in a minute. In 1964, the world cocoa price collapses to a 19-year low. Here's where I have to stop and take something away from you. Have you heard that the United States deliberately crashed the world cocoa price to break Nkrumah, dumping stockpiles, flooding the market, engineering the collapse? It's repeated constantly. You've probably met it. Did you believe it? We went looking for that. We could not substantiate it. No primary documentation, no scholarly support, no evidence of a U.S. cocoa stockpile of the kind the story requires. What the economic literature does show is a supply glut, a record West African harvest, with Ghana alone producing 538,000 tons, about 38% of the entire world's cocoa. The economic literature attributes the collapse to that glut, not to a stockpile. Nobody had to crash the market. It crashed on its own, and separately with a different cause, the aid was withheld anyway, deliberately, in a policy one NSC staffer described in writing as helping to set up the situation. Two facts, two separate causes. We're not merging them into one to make a cleaner story. One more piece of the money picture belongs here, and you should notice how badly it complicates the aid was simply cut off. Story you were just given. Ghana's Volta River Dam sold power to the Volta Aluminum Company, an American operation led by Kaiser Aluminum, at a rate reportedly far below what Ghanaian citizens themselves paid. That project kept getting American financing through the same years. The ambassador was urging Nkrumah's general aid requests be refused. I want to flag the sourcing honestly here. The contract's exact terms rest on weaker material than the FRUS record you've just read, and I haven't confirmed them against the primary agreement myself. No document ties the funding decision to the contract terms. Placed side by side, though, it's a connection worth having in front of you before you decide how simple this story is. There's a second popular claim worth checking with you, because it's told almost universally. In 1965, Nkrumah published a book, Neo-Colonialism, the last stage of imperialism, arguing that formally independent states remain economically directed from outside and naming the CIA. The version usually told is that Washington was furious, sent a protest note, and canceled $25 million in aid. He wrote the book, so they cut the money, so he fell. Two problems with that, and you should weigh both. First, the timing. The ambassador was already urging that aid be refused in March, and a U.S. embassy paper, reportedly titled A Proposed Aid Posture Toward a Successor Government to Nkrumah's, is dated that April, both months before the book reached print. The policy did not follow the book. Second, we searched twice, in two separate research passes, for a primary or scholarly source behind the $25 million figure itself. Both times, all we found was the same claim, repeated across publisher and advocacy copy, citing nothing underneath it. That doesn't prove no such document exists, only that neither pass could find one. What the record does support is plainer and less tidy. Aid was already being withheld before the book existed, and the book, if it changed anything, hardened attitudes that were already set. Now, if you're starting to feel this is heading somewhere one-sided, good. Hold on to that. Because what comes next is the part these stories usually leave out, and leaving it out would make this propaganda rather than history. Kwame Nkrumah was not a man to whom things merely happened. In 1958, his government passed the Preventive Detention Act, imprisonment without charge and without trial, initially up to 5 years, extended to 10 in 1959, made indefinite in 1962. In 1964, a referendum made Ghana a one-party state and Nkrumah president for life. The official result was 99.91% in favor, a result widely regarded as rigged. Would you accept that number from any government anywhere? Of the 32 opposition members of parliament at independence, 3 were in detention, 1 in exile, and 12 had crossed to the government benches. More were later imprisoned, fled the country, or were absorbed into the ruling party. Ask yourself what your own options would have looked like. By 1965, there was no lawful way to remove this government. And the officers who moved against him had grievances you'd recognize from your own job if you've ever had one. Their pay had collapsed. Their equipment was worn out. Afrifa himself wrote afterwards about the neglect of the army. Whatever else is true, and whatever you decide about the rest of this, these were real men with real complaints, not puppets on a foreign string. A leader's position was worsened by a foreign policy one NSC staffer described in writing as helping to set up the situation. That same leader had made himself impossible to remove from inside. Neither cancels the other, and any version of this story that needs one of them to disappear, including, if it comes to it, this one, is a version you should distrust. Which brings us to the 24th of February, and to what you've really been waiting for. The coup itself is quick. Officers move at dawn. There is fighting at the president's residence. General Charles Barwa is killed refusing to join. How many others died with him is genuinely disputed. Official counts are low. Some estimates are far higher, and no figure I found traces cleanly to a primary source. Nkrumah's biographer June Milne disputed the British press description of a bloodless coup. Take the word bloodless with care. Nkrumah hears about it in Peking en route, still trying to reach Hanoi to end a war that isn't his. Try to picture receiving that call yourself on the other side of the world. He'll spend the rest of his life in Guinea, where Sékou Touré makes him co-president of a country he doesn't govern. He dies of cancer in Bucharest in 1972, aged 62. His body comes home that July, after months of argument over whether it could. Now watch how long it actually took Washington to move, because the popular version of this story has the timing wrong. How many days do you think it was? Picture yourself as the State Department, one day after the coup. Your instruction to your own embassy in Accra is caution, not speed. The first move has to come from Ghana's new government, and the cable specifically warns against appearing overzealous by acting too quickly. A week later, the embassy is still waiting on the new government's own list of what it wants. 16 days in, Robert Comer proposes to President Johnson not confirms, a symbolic gesture. A few thousand tons of surplus wheat or rice, worth more for its psychology than its cost. 4 weeks in, the new government's own chairman, Nkrumah, is still writing to Johnson to ask, warning of a looming famine, hoping the response will be swift. The first food aid this record documents arriving is a PL 480 agreement signed on the 1st of April, 36 days after the coup, followed about a week later by an airlift of 25 tons of canned milk that Johnson himself calls tangible recognition of your emergency food requirements. Roughly 5 to 6 weeks, not days. And the delay was policy, stated in writing by Washington the day after the coup, not a shipping problem. World cocoa prices rise after the coup on their own timeline. You can't credit the coup for that one. In March, representatives of the IMF and World Bank arrive in Accra. On the 17th of May, less than 12 weeks after the coup, Ghana formally approaches the IMF, something Nkrumah had refused to do, right up to the end. He'd refused the IMF's conditions in May 1965, and again when the World Bank restated them that September. Hold that refusal in your mind. His successors formally approached the IMF within 12 weeks of removing him, a reversal on the record, though what they ultimately accepted, and when is a separate, later question this file doesn't fully date. No document explains that reversal as anything other than a change of government. The sequence is what's established, not a mechanism connecting one refusal to the other. So what did the years after actually look like for the country you've been watching this happen to? State enterprises dismantled or transferred to foreign firms. The cedi devalued 30% in 1967. Agricultural spending cut by 35%. Nearly finished cocoa silos abandoned. A gold refinery abandoned. State farms worth 6.6 million cedis transferred without proper documentation. Around 446 of Nkrumah's people detained. 37 vans sent to 700 villages to, in the new government's own words, destroy the image of Nkrumah. And then, 3.5 years on, the same council that did all that held elections lost them. Busia's Progress Party took 105 of 140 seats and dissolved itself on the 1st of October, 1969. Two things worth being precise about before you go further with me. First, the aid timeline is dated to the day in the primary American record. The IMF dates and the aftermath detail the devaluation, the detentions, the vans rest on secondary reporting instead, and it's worth saying that plainly rather than letting one borrow the other's certainty. Second, and hold me to this, sequence is not proof of design. Does one thing following another prove somebody arranged it? No. What the dates establish is the shape of the thing. What you do with that shape is genuinely yours. So let's do the hard part properly together. There are 3 ways to read this evidence. I'll build each one as strongly as I can and then try to break it. If you had to argue any of these to someone who disagreed with you, could you? Reading 1. Orchestration, the one you may have walked in expecting. Washington ran this. The ambassador names plotters, correctly identifying 2 of the 8 men who'd end up holding power a year out. One NSC staffer records that the plotters are briefing Washington. Aid is refused as declared policy, and money keeps flowing to the one project Volta America wanted funded. When the money finally does move after the coup, 5 to 6 weeks in, it moves on a schedule that reads less like an accident and more like a decision. Wait for the new government to ask, then answer. On this reading, the coup is an American operation with Ghanaian hands. Now watch me break it and ask yourself if this is what you'd expect from an operation Washington actually ran. Mahoney's list, the hardest single piece of named foreknowledge this episode rests on, missed the 2 men who actually led the operation. Katoka and Afrifa never appear in it, and named one man, Adu, who never took power at all. If you were running this operation, would you have missed your own operational leaders? The CIA's own internal memo, written the day after the coup for the deputy director, describes intelligence collection, watching, tracking a conspiracy, not direction. Comer's memo contains an explicit denial of direct involvement, and Washington's read of the plot was demonstrably wrong in real time. That same CIA memo notes Nkrumah retired his defense chief, Atu, and Atu's deputy, Nkrumah, in July 1965, and calls that move enough to neutralize both as coup leaders. It didn't. Nkrumah chairs the government that takes power 7 months later. You don't run an operation whose own personnel you can't track. Reading 2. The green light, and you'll want to follow this one closely. On this reading, Washington didn't run it but knew it was coming, was in contact with men who'd end up in the new government and shaped conditions deliberately, refusing aid, keeping Volta funded, watching the plot develop without ever pulling the trigger itself. Not the author of the coup on this account. Its enabler. It never had to take the operational risk of running an agent inside a foreign army, and it still got a government it could work with. Isn't that the better deal if you could get it? Now, if you're inclined to agree, let's test it hardest of all. Green light implies a signal. Where is it in anything you've been shown? No located document contains one. Nobody in this record is shown telling the plotters to proceed. It's an inference, a reasonable one, drawn from foreknowledge plus contact plus timing, but an inference is not a document. And there is a document you've already seen that cuts against it. The State Department's own cable to its embassy, written the day after the coup, instructing caution and warning specifically against looking overzealous. Would an enabler collecting on an investment write that down for itself the day after the payoff, and then make the winners wait 5 weeks and ask first? Reading 3. A Ghanaian coup with an interested audience. On this reading, Ghanaian officers with Ghanaian grievances, the pay, the equipment, Afrifa's own account of the neglect, removed a Ghanaian government that had made itself unremovable by any lawful means. The plotting stalled for months in 1965 on Ghanaian timing, not American timing, when Nkrumah reshuffled his own command and neutralized 2 of his 3 watched men without Washington's help. Washington watched an audience it didn't fully control, was pleased with the outcome, and reacted late and cautiously, a spectator, not a producer. And break that one. It has to explain away Comer's own language, not just the plotting timeline. Do audiences get briefed by the people on stage? The plotters are keeping us briefed describes the plotters actively reporting in 9 months before they moved. That's not what an uninvolved audience gets told. Nor is helping to set up the situation the language of a bystander. It's Comer's own description of U.S. conduct as contributory, written by the man not running the operation. A purely domestic account can explain the coup's leadership. It cannot as easily explain why the staffer who insisted Washington wasn't directly involved still described American policy as helping build the conditions for it. So where does that leave you? Not with 3 equal readings. I'm not going to insult you with false balance. The documents sit most uncomfortably with reading 3 and most comfortably with reading 2, though reading 2 rests on inference rather than paper. Does knowing that change how much weight you put on it? Here's the open question I actually think this file leaves you with, and it's not mine to close. 9 months apart, 2 documents describe the same relationship in incompatible language. One NSC staffer's memo in May 1965. The plotters are keeping us briefed. The CIA's own internal memo the day after the coup, a narrative of collection of watching. Briefed and watched are not the same relationship. Which one had it right, or did each only see the part it was told? One more thread and stay with me because it reaches beyond Ghana, and you'll want it in your pocket for later. 5 years before all this, in July 1960, Ghana was the first country to send troops into the Congo at Patrice Lumumba's request. Roughly 2,500 men, about half of Ghana's entire military and police strength. Nkrumah sent advisors. He lobbied the United Nations personally. Ghanaian soldiers were under UN command, and you should know, before you judge what came next, that command wouldn't let them act against the Kathangan secession. They were present in the country under that mandate and did not intervene. Lumumba was murdered in January 1961. Scholars of the period link that murder directly to the hardening of Nkrumah's politics and to the book he published 4 years later, naming the CIA. He'd committed half his army trying to keep another leader in power and couldn't. If you're keeping score, notice that this failure was real too. 5 years later, men the CIA had been tracking since at least February 1965 took his own country while he was in the air. Before we close, one more documented pattern for you, and be honest with yourself about whether it was ever mentioned in whatever you'd heard about this coup before tonight. Nkrumah is not the only leader in our own catalog removed while out of the country at an international summit. Milton Obote of Uganda in 1971 at a Commonwealth summit in Singapore. Yakubu Gowon of Nigeria in 1975 at an OAU summit in Kampala. 3 heads of state, 3 countries, 9 years, the same shape each time. We're not claiming a single hand behind that pattern. 3 separately sourced incidents, the same shape, that's the observation. And it's exactly the kind of connection nobody following one country's history alone would ever have the material to make. What it's worth is yours to decide. So back to the plane, the one you started with. This was a man who had publicly accused the CIA of subversion 2 years earlier, who had written a book about it, who was not naive. And this same man got on that plane anyway to try to end someone else's war. What he could not arrange was a government at home that would still be his to come back to. Would knowing have changed what you did in his position? The man who saw it coming and the man who boarded the plane anyway are the same man, in the same week, and this episode doesn't get to pick one over the other. Here's what you specifically can take with you. Washington had refused Nkrumah's requests for money since early 1965. Once he was gone, the government that replaced him got that money, but not within days. 5 to 6 weeks on America's own schedule, and only after Ghana asked first. That figure is dated, sourced, and about as settled as anything in this file.